wasn't recording. I'm so mad.
It was so funny because I was looking at Christian and then I hear this voice coming out of the heavens. I was like, oh my gosh.
Perfect definition of coming in hot.
I know.
Hi guys.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm actually kind of nervous, I have to say, because this is like, I've been off for so long that it's feeling all new to me right now.
Really?
So, yeah.
Good. This is good to jump you back into it then, huh?
I did my first consult since December yesterday. So I'm feeling good.
Feeling good? Good.
Getting back into the swing of things. Yeah.
Good.
So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were, Jesse and I were just literally kind of going over some of the questions and topics as
okay.
heard the latter end of that. So we'll, I think, Jesse, you're going to do like an intro or something?
Yeah. So obviously we wanted to bring you on, of course, but initially when we spoke about this seminar series that we kind of wanted to launch, we created this survey and said, what lacks in a seminar, especially a female-based one. And a lot of them were pertaining to obviously what you study under. So, and essentially my thoughts like about seminars, I'm like, what is so common with all seminars? Like they go over lifts. Like that's just a common thing. And I was like, how can we do a different approach to it? And I was telling Julia, I was like, nobody ever follows up, or nobody ever keeps connection or see how they're doing, or if they are applying what they learned to their daily, routine and whatnot. What is going to really impact and make them feel like they have a resource or a person that they can talk to.
Yeah.
So obviously this was like the biggest, I guess, inquiry or like request as far as like a female-based seminar. So we appreciate you going on board and taking your time.
I'm excited
to answer these questions.
Yeah, no, I totally am. And I am especially with the powerlifting crowd, because like, I know last year when Dave and I did those like couple videos for Elite FTS, like I was getting so many messages from women being like, this is the first time I've ever heard somebody in powerlifting talking about women's health. And I was like, okay, this is good. We just got to keep going with that. Because
So with that being said, for those that don't know about you, can you kind of introduce your background and your experience with everything?
Yeah, so it's a lot. Like my background, well, I study women and steroids. That's, ultimately what my research is in. And I say the word steroids very loosely, and I actually use that word because I want to mix up what our current ideas are about what steroids are, both within the body, but also exogenously. And so all too often people think that steroids exogenously are just anabolic steroids, and that's all there is. And they fail to recognize that things like birth control are a steroid. And that a lot of the side effects that women experience when they either are on the pill or go off the pill are things that are very, very in line with what men experience when they're long-term testosterone users. And so for me, it was starting to bring a consciousness to that aspect, but then also to talk about just the hormones themselves and what they do in our bodies. And so my background is I'm currently doing my PhD, but I've got my master's and my undergrad in kinesiology and sports science. I was an exercise physiologist for a couple of years. But really, a lot of it came through my own health issues as a female athlete. So I was a classical ballet dancer growing up before I found weightlifting. And that, though, really messed me up in terms of my hormones. And that's kind of set the stage for the rest of my life, because I was a very active young girl. And when I went through puberty, I ended up having 2-week-long periods. And so as a ballet dancer, that is like the worst thing, to be in a leotard and tights and have 2-week-long heavy periods. And so my doctor's first inclination was, well, we need to control them. And so at 13 years old, I was put on low dose birth control. And I can see Julia's face right now being like, oh my God. But the thing is this is standard practice. Unfortunately, this is completely standard practice, and even more so within the athlete population. So fast forward, I over exercising, I had an eating disorder, I was on birth control. So I didn't actually go through puberty like most young girls do until I was about 19. And that's when my whole body just was like, you know what, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, enough. And things started to tank for me really, really quickly. I had already gotten into weight training at this point. And I'm very, very fortunate that that's when I paired up with my mentor, Dr. Eric Serrano. That was actually when I first got paired up with John Meadows and Dave Tate. And so that I'm very grateful for that experience looking back on it, because it did totally change the route of my life. But it did also create this awareness that I had no clue the side effects of birth control. And my mom was actually the first nurse practitioner in Canada. She had no clue, because they don't talk about them even in medicine. And there's this degree of ignorance that exists. And so it really is such a scary thing for an individual to go through when they're being told by their doctors that like nothing's wrong. There's nothing wrong with you at all. You were on the pill, let's just try you on a different drug and see if that kickstarts your period, or something like that. That's kind of the conversation around it. Right. Fast forward to my research today, and it is looking at the female athlete population, specifically because women as a whole are under researched. Female athletes, though, are even more so, and it's there's like such a massive void in literature, and I can't emphasize that enough, that when it comes to females and drug use, when it comes to understanding of just female reproductive cycles, as it relates to the athlete, there is just an absolute void of literature on that. And the literature that does exist, it's not that all is problematic, but a fair bit of it is incredibly problematic, because they are going off of just old stereotypes and stigmas and myths that really aren't based on anything, and then calling it science. So my work is working towards bringing an awareness about this. And yeah, that's my background. It's a bit of a long-winded story, but I think it does line up how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's not really funny, but I actually had a girlfriend come over this morning. I was cooking her breakfast, but she knows of you, and she's like, I can't believe you're talking to her. She's helped me so much. She grew up as a dancer as well, and she's dealing with hormonal stuff and hormone stuff, and I just wanted to listen to her story, really, just because I actually have never struggled with that kind of stuff. So I actually have no educational background. I had a regular period. I've never been on birth control. Obviously, you guys, growing up as a ballerina, Julia was in, figure and bodybuilding and whatnot. So those are different sports that I never had experience through. So this is a learning experience for me, just talking to you now. So again, thank you. Julia, do you want to start with any questions? I know you had some current ones.
Yes, I do. So I think we're going to end up having a lot of questions that are going to be birth control related, reproductive organ related. So maybe as you touch a little bit on that, and can you give us maybe a little bit of a background on, because like Cassie said, I never really struggled much with that aspect. I tried going on birth control many, many, many years ago, lost my period within a couple months, and my gut told me that was not a good thing. But I didn't know why at the time, so I got off birth control and never went back on it. I just felt like if the body's supposed to go through that monthly thing, it should go through that monthly thing. So can you touch a little bit on that? Is that important in a female's hormone kind of cycle? And then talk about birth control. One of the questions that was asked was actually how to effectively and safely come off of birth control. So take it away.
Oh my goodness. Okay. literally scratching notes down on sticky notes so I don't forget anything. Okay, so I think the best place to start off is like I just kind of mentioned, is that there's a whole heck of a lot we don't know about the human body, male, female, animal, it doesn't matter. I refer to it almost like when you go outside in clear night, you look up into the stars. We think we know what's going on, but we really have no clue. And like Pluto is my go-to example, in that when I was a kid, it was a planet, and then all of a sudden, and I'm in high school, and it's suddenly not a planet, and now they think it's a planet again, but they're not quite sure. That is the human body, and that is the female menstrual cycle. And that there is this idea that we kind of know what's going on, but when you start to peel back the layers and when you start to peel back the research, there is such a misunderstanding. And there's also just this lack of ability for people to say we don't know. And that's like one of my favorite things to say, even though I as a female, that's not always the best thing to say to somebody when they are, when I remember when Eric Serrano said that to me when I was like 19, 20 years old, he had no clue what was going on with me. And I just like bawled my eyes up because all I wanted was answers. Mm-hmm. And recognizing though, that is something that I'm very grateful that he said to me, because it has influenced my path forward and also how I work with other women. And it's really to start off by saying, like, there's a lot we don't know. What we do know though is that there's a lot of myths and misconceptions, taboos around women's bodies, women's health, reproduction, and that has really become even more of an issue in medicine, because right now women's reproductive health disturbances are at an all-time high. Women are having their periods at a lower age, and we're seeing trends that every couple decades there's another dramatic drop when you look at large-scale data. There is just an epidemic in disturbances in women's life cycles, not only at the beginning, but throughout their entire hormonal life cycle. More and more women are having, menstrual difficulties, from cramping to endometriosis to fibroids, pain, heavy bleeding, infertility, breast cancer, issues going through menopause, which I'll touch on that a bit. I think that was one of the topics we wanted to cover. You've got more women that are exposed to things like xenotoxins or artificial estrogens, because estrogens can be in our environment too. So we are getting them through exposure to our foods, just the general environment itself. Mood disorders right now are at an all-time high. So the lovely term that I cannot stand, it's PPMD, but it's essentially premenstrual disorder. And the recent literature said that 75% of all the women in the US have claimed that they have been on some type of, or had some type of PMS type symptom. It's not normal. It's not normal for us as a society to be experiencing this level of menstrual and reproductive issues. It's not normal for women to be having infertility like they are. And unfortunately, what a lot of times, especially in the fitness industry, people just start pointing the finger at hormones, and they go like, oh, her hormones are imbalanced, or her hormones are off. And it's a heck of a lot more complicated than that. There's so many different things happening. And yes, hormones are so important to this, but there's a lot of other factors too. So I urge any individual that might be having any of these things to get help with a doctor that will actually look at the underlying issues. Having cramps is not it's not a symptom, it's a side effect that something else is going on, and you have to treat that something else. Unfortunately, my doctor, when I was 13 years old, putting me on birth control, that was merely putting a Band-Aid on a much, much bigger thing that then came back to bite me in the ass later on in life. And so like that, I think is a nice kind of maybe getting into the topic a little bit more, because it isn't, periods shouldn't suck at the end of the day. We've kind of normalized the idea that periods suck, and that, it's going to be just awful. I'm going to have sharp pains. I'm going to feel like I'm dying. There's enough memes on social media that talks about that. But a healthy period means that you have one. You still are going to feel that there's something going on, but it doesn't mean that it should disrupt your life or disrupt your training. It also means that you should have one. That's another big thing. Not having a regular and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but an ovulatory cycle where you actually ovulate is so important. I cannot stress that enough. And so one of the first things that any individual female can do, or males working with females, is to get people to start tracking their menstrual cycles every single month for at least, 3 to 6 months. If there's somebody that's had a ton of issues over the course of their life cycle, I would suggest doing it for 6 months, because guess what? The periods are freaking unpredictable, even for individuals that are on pills, even for individuals that think they have a grasp on things and then something stressful happens in their life. So by tracking, it pretty much gives you almost like a report card. And that report card then can be utilized to find out what's actually going on with your hormones, what's going on with your menstrual cycle. And then that can help you better understand how this relates to training, or to fat loss, or to whatever the other goal, like more performance-based goal might be. And so ovulatory cycles, different than just saying like periods. I use slang terms all the time, and then I realize as I like start to explain things and settings like this, I'm like, shit, I shouldn't have used that term. That is not right. But so women can bleed. I'm just going to be crude. Women can bleed from their vagina for multiple different reasons, and it doesn't mean that they're having a menstrual cycle. I joke around by saying like a weekend of rough sex will result in blood in your underwear. Like it's so asinine that people still in 2019 think that blood means period. UTIs, bacterial vaginal infections, yeast infections, having low hormones, especially like low estrogen, friction. There's so many different things that can cause somebody to have bloody discharge. And so while we do associate blood with a menstrual cycle, it's important to note that too. What is really important when we start talking about like what does a healthy period look like is ovulating. And ovulating is the marker that somebody is fertile. It's the marker that somebody is healthy. If you ovulate, it means that you're making progesterone, and progesterone is one of the main kind of 3 sex hormones that are associated with reproduction and just life itself. And so we have androgens, we have estrogens, and then we have progesterone. And those are the 3. There's a lot more, but in a very simplified sense, those are your 3. Now, progesterone is, in my opinion, the most underrated hormone there is. As strength athletes, it's all about the androgens. It's all about the androgens. And the converse side of that is that then it's like, well, if androgens make me strong, estrogens make me weak. Therefore, I need to get rid of my estrogens. And that is not something that it upsets me to no end, because that is so problematic. Unfortunately, though, progesterone is the one that gets forgotten. And progesterone has a profound impact on our health. It's also just a really badass hormone because it does have like thermogenic properties. So if we really want to get into like performance enhancing effects, it's an awesome hormone to have. But if you don't ovulate, you don't make most of your progesterone. So when a female goes on birth control, she is stopping her body from ovulating. And by birth control, I mean that's an oral contraceptive pill, typically speaking, or an injectable, a patch, a pellet. Hormonal IUDs, they also, typically speaking, will stop women from ovulating. It's not, there's not enough research to support if this is across the board, but it's rare. And even in copper IUDs, they can also cause enough disturbances that a female won't ovulate, because in order for the body to ovulate, it's got to be in a good place. So when a female ovulates, it means she's fertile. It means that if necessary, she can carry a baby. Your body needs to know, it's very, very smart. It needs to know that it can actually do that. So if an individual is under stress, whether that's induced from training, whether that's diet-wise, whether it's caloric, whether it is a trauma in their life, whether that is a weekend bender of really shitty food, whether it is alcohol or drug use. It could be also internal. There could be something that's a dysfunctional aspect of their health. Maybe it's their microbiome that's really messed up. It could be some type of actual injury that you go through, maybe a tear or a sprain, and your body then starts shooting out way too much inflammatory response. And that will tell your body like, hey, like this is not a good time for us to get pregnant here. So we're just not going to ovulate. You can still.
Quick question. Can you ovulate and not have a period?
It's rare, but it's not impossible. Okay. You can have blood, like you can have flow, and you can think that you have even a normal cycle. It can be like clockwork, say every 28 to 32 days, and not actually ovulate though. Non-ovulatory cycles are one of the biggest things that women experience in terms of like a menstrual disturbance. They are incredibly common, to the point that I've got colleagues of mine that go like, you know what, they're so common that they get forgotten that they're even an issue. Like they don't get talked about in that same language because they are so common. Women don't necessarily need to ovulate every single cycle. It is a lot for some individuals to go through. Some individuals do also get we're now starting to learn about things like hormonal allergies and all these other crazy immune responses that some people have. But ultimately, an ovulatory period is a marker of health. It is a marker of your body is in a good place, and it is crucial that as women we have ovulatory cycles, because that's how we preserve our bones. That's just one example, but bone health, estrogen can make it, but progesterone is going to preserve it. And so imagine if for over half your life you did not have an ovulatory period because you were on birth control. The effects of that long term are terrifying. And it also does relate to more issues going through like perimenopause, because your body all of a sudden's like, hey, I got a lot of eggs left to deposit, but my internal clock is ticking and I need to get rid of these things now so I can move on to the next phase of my hormonal life cycle. It's too much going on. Your body gets confused and it pretty much gives you the middle finger being like, what did you do to me? So yeah, I can go into some more details, but that really is the menstrual cycle. There are changes in your hormones that elicit it. In the first half, your estrogen goes up, it drops down, you ovulate, your progesterone goes up, it drops down, you have a menses or a bleed. Menses is what is the term for the bleed. Menstrual cycle is the term for the whole thing. Ovulation is when it's usually about mid-cycle, and it's that process in which you create progesterone. There's two other main hormones that are involved here, and that's LH, or luteinizing hormone, and FSH, which is follicular stimulating hormone. And those are hormones that are kind of helping to kick off this whole response. Androgens are also in the loop, though. They are also so forgotten when you look at those stupid graphs online, that you do have changes in androgens throughout your menstrual cycle. Your androgens, your testosterone, it doesn't dip and have quite as much of a change as, say, estrogen and progesterone, but it does change throughout. And so does something like relaxin, which is really important for strength athletes, because that is going to change how your body, how flexible you are, how, if you're feeling incredibly tight one day, check your menstrual tracker, because that could mean that your relaxin levels might have changed because of where you are in your cycle. They're usually higher when you have estrogen and lower when you have progesterone. Which, just as a side, it's why women who are on exogenous estrogen are more prone to having like hypermobility. And also if you're on estrogen at the same time you're going through puberty, you can get really hypermobile, and not in a good way, because that lingers and does some damage. So
on that same subject, then, how much does a woman's full menstrual cycle, this was one of the questions that you mentioned, was how much does it really affect our training then as strength athletes? Is it true that there's certain periods of those 4 weeks that we're stronger? Is it true that it affects our we know it affects our energy levels to a degree, but as far as training and the whole strength process, can you go into that? And is that really true?
Yeah. So the thing is that the menstrual cycle is not something that we, like I said, we can predict. And that comes down to, does somebody have, I mean, are they ovulating? Are they, do they have any other types of hormonal disturbances going on?
So that would be a precursor. You really need to know what's going on in the person's body prior.
Absolutely. And a great example of this is, say somebody has, let's say, say they have a type of cyst. There's many different types of cysts that women can have on their ovaries. But the bigger the cyst, the more pressure you're creating in your pelvic cavity. Right. If you're creating more pressure in your pelvic cavity, guess what goes out the freaking door? Pelvic floor, just ability to even do anything with it. So if you are trying to train and you don't have any pelvic floor connection anymore, if you can't create intra-abdominal pressure, you are going to throw off your entire workout. And so something like that is incredibly important for strength athletes. But is it what's traditionally talked about in the cute little like e-programs and shit like that? No, because what they try to do is tell us that we can actually, eat carbs around certain levels of hormones and manage our training volume around this. But ultimately, and I really, really hope that women can appreciate this, it is chaos. I mean, I used a slide at Swiss this past fall, and I thought there were some women that were like laughing so hard they were crying because I was talking about the unpredictability of the menstrual cycle. And it was like this little cartoon of a woman getting just sucker punched by this giant red blob. And it was like, surprise, motherfucker. Because all of us have probably been through one of those, workouts that you go to the bathroom after and you're just like, fuck me, really? I was not expecting this. So if that's the case, can we really predict our menstrual cycle? And if we can't, then my question to can you train for your menstrual cycle is really, can you? It doesn't make sense for me. It comes down to the individual. Now, if somebody's doing that type of data collection and actually tracking, I always do this with individuals I work with, is that I get them to track how their workouts were. And I have all the data about what their hormones are doing above and where they are in their menstrual cycle. And if after 3 to 6 months, I'm seeing some trends, then absolutely we can start to manipulate around that. But we can't go into something blindly, especially when it could have the opposite effect, because we might perceive that it's going to do one thing and it might do something totally different. There's also a lot of other things that hormones do inside our body. And there's also a lot of other things that affect our hormones. So, I mean, estrogen and insulin have a very close relationship to one another. So if we start pulling carbs, say, because that's what we need to do to be able to stop fat gain from happening in the first half of our menstrual cycle, you probably now are not going to ovulate, because you need carbs to be able to signal to your body that it's okay to ovulate. So you can have that reverse effect. That's the same thing with strength athletes. And I've seen this a lot lately, is that they're trying to program to where they think their period is, but they don't have a fucking period. They are having breakthrough bleeding, and it is not the same as a menstrual cycle. But they perceive, because they have read stuff for a couple days in their underwear, that this must be a period.
Very interesting.
My question though, so when you try to collect data from people on an individual basis, how do they rate what their training is? Is that like a 1 to 10? Do they write down, how their emotions or what they felt? Because say, hey, I was bleeding in this, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday only. You do that every month, but how do you track what, as far as like their emotions or how their workout intensity was? How do you?
Yeah, so I utilize, and I can pass this along if you guys want to post this when you post the podcast, but there is a very basic menstrual cycle tracker that was done in the early 1990s, and it is the gold standard. I suggest women use this rather than an app, because number one, apps crash. 2, you get a new phone and that app doesn't work. You've just lost all your data. 3, it is really important as strength athletes that we can actually do what you're saying and compare data and the apps don't create room for that. And often they also don't track certain markers that you might be interested in tracking to be able to adequately start to use this as data that can help you with your training. So one of the things that I do and I suggest for individuals is that most people probably have some type of program that they're working off of. And so to literally keep that program, you can see what your volume is, and be really honest and do a self-assessment at the end of it. Go like, did I actually have anything in the tank here? And did I have any extra stress going on? So I usually say like add in some markers of external stress. So if you're, say, a college student, you're in exams, well, yeah, that's going to affect your training. We're not even talking about where you are with your period. That's going to affect your training. Your sleep. How many hours did you sleep, and was it solid sleep? Right. Where's your digestion? Rank your nutrition. And I typically use words like a sliding scale instead of using numbers. You literally, the sliding scale of words is like exceptional, good, right, mediocre, not adequate, and shit the bed. So you've got your 5-point scale, but I feel that it's a little bit easier for us to be a bit more objective about it, because most of us come out of a workout, we're like, fuck, that was an awesome workout. Or I nailed that PR, or whatever it might be. And so if you record that, I don't have one with me right now, but a date book is a great tool to do for this. You just buy yourself a date book with the actual like days of the week, and you use that to record. And then at the end of each month, if you do it monthly, it's a lot easier than if you try to sit down at the end of 3 months. Right. Give yourself a little idea of like, okay, well, I can see that I ovulated this month. My training volume, if I think about my program, it's not that high right now. So it's great that I've ovulated and my training volume is not that high. My nutrition was really solid. I didn't have a lot of external stresses. This is great. Write some notes about that. Flip to the next month. Okay, now say next month passes, your training volume kicked up. You broke up with your boyfriend. You had to move out of your apartment. You ate McDonald's 6 out of the 7 days a week, and you didn't ovulate. Your training was shitty. So can we say that that's because you didn't ovulate? Probably not, but we can begin to start to collect this data, then compare it to the next month. Does that make sense, that it is about recognizing other factors too and recording that stuff? Right.
Okay. I actually have a friend, she says she uses the Daisy tracker. I've never heard of that. Have you heard of that?
I have, and I do have some individuals I work with that utilize that. Okay. I'm a cheap as fuck university student still, so I literally go with a thermometer. You want to try to get one with 2 decimal points. They're like $10 on Amazon. Okay. You don't even need to buy, like, there are the fertility and like the fertility tracking thermometers. They're usually just pink, like that. They're double the price, but they're pink. And so double digit, something that's got a little bit more sensitive reading than something just say from a drugstore, and a date book. And I'll give you guys like the one little tracking tool. Daisies can get up in price. That's the only thing, is you're looking at, I think it's about $2.99 USD. Okay. And if you're somebody who's just getting into this, it's good to recognize that you can do it for a lot cheaper.
Right. Good point. We'll just lead on to this question she had, but she asked, if you switch from oral birth control to a tracking device like Daisy, will Anna affect the reading results?
Absolutely. Okay. Anytime you use a hormone, even if you're somebody who's using, say, hydrocortisone cream for your, acne, hydrocortisone cream is a hormone. It's a topical one. It's going to affect your body's ability to find its readings. There's other similar mechanisms. So you've got the Daisy, but then there's also dipstick testing to see whether or not you've ovulated. If somebody has higher levels of androgens in their body, whether this is from an exogenous form or an endogenous, so I call it aovulatory androgen excess, but it's PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome. You're going to be having different levels of FSH and LH, which will change how accurate those tests are going to be. I did an experiment one day, so I have high levels of androgens naturally, and I got a whole bunch of ovulation checkers, and I peed on all of them, and I was pregnant in one, I was not ovulating in another, I was ovulating in one. So it goes to show you that the accuracy when your body is a little bit different than the norm,
Right.
is going to throw things off.
Wow. Crazy.
Most the time, I mean, with androgens, it's really common that women won't ovulate. They might get breakthrough bleeding, but it's very common that women won't ovulate. I mean, androgens were used as the first form of like reproductive drugs. That was what was used in the late 1930s, 1940s for reproductive disturbances. Estrogen was also used. Estrogen was the first like PED used by women. And that is, I mean, that's one big piece of my research is talking about that. But yeah, so I mean, if an individual's on something like, say, oxandrolone or Anavar, they might ovulate at the beginning, but after prolonged use, it is really unlikely that they're going to continue to ovulate because you throw off your hormones. It's common to see then, and I use the acronym HELP, so high estrogen, low progesterone. So if you don't ovulate, your progesterone is going to be low and your estrogen will start to kick up to try to have defenses. Like if you don't make hormones in your body, no matter where the source might be, your body will try to compensate. Often with progesterone, it will be cortisol levels will go up and estrogen levels will go up. And then you lead into this lovely shit storm of other things, especially if you've got any type of, I mean, genetic difference or you've got some other type of health issue going on. And so with taking an exogenous androgen, you're inviting a high androgen level into your body. You are essentially inducing hyperandrogenism, which a piece of that hyperandrogenism is non-ovulatory cycles. That is polycystic ovarian syndrome. It is when you have high levels of androgens and you have, I mean, pretty much non-ovulatory cycles. And the high levels of androgens are also opening you up to other things, such as menstrual like irregularity, long and heavy periods, but then also hair growth, hirsutism, inflammation, dysbiosis of the microbiome, ovarian, just general ovarian dysfunction. So it can be a cyst, but doesn't have to be a cyst. And usually then there's also other types of androgen excess related disorders, such as like hypothyroidism. That one's hugely connected because thyroid hormone and estrogen are so interrelated.
So I have a question. It's raining here, so I apologize. But you mentioned something like an Anavar, okay, which is pretty popular among women in the strength sports. Two parts. One, if somebody is on exogenous steroids like that, most likely probably not. Question number one, how do they know they're ovulating if they're not having any bleeding? Okay, so that's the first part of the question. And two, will that ultimately, and I'm assuming I know the answer, but will that?
Oh, you're breaking up.
Will that come back, Julia?
Yes.
I can kind of hear her.
Can you?
Maybe it kind of sounds like a Martian.
All right, hold on. Let me see. I don't know where she's passing. I know she's like, they're driving to Ohio right now.
I figured that's where she was on the road too.
Let me text her and see.
I'm not crazy. I can't hear her.
Did you hear her first part?
Yeah. She left the meeting. Yeah, no, absolutely. So the first part is the easiest and the most accurate way is actually to check your basal temperature. So it's called your quantitative basal temperature, your QBT. And that's because progesterone has that thermogenic effect. So if you ovulate, your body temperature, your waking temperature first thing in the morning, it's going to go up around 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.3 degrees Celsius for a couple days there in your period, and then it will, or in your menstrual cycle, and then it will drop back down again to more of a baseline. Because like that is like, I mean, that's the gold standard. It also, though, allows you to see, like if you're going to get lab work done, you can get lab work done at a more accurate time because you can track that around when you ovulate. The other big thing here is cervical fluid. So cervical fluid is it's most obvious the days before somebody ovulates. And you'll see it anytime you have high estrogen compared to progesterone. And so if you see it after you ovulate, it usually means you don't have enough progesterone being produced. But cervical fluid is the sticky, thick stuff. It is different than just, I mean, watery discharge. It is sticky, it is thick, and it feels like raw egg whites. It's usually clear. It can be stretching. I mean, you can literally Google cervical fluid, and there is a lot of women that have decided to take pictures of it and put it online because for fertility, that's how people then do like fertility treatments.
Yeah.
But so cervical fluid is your other one. The other kind of ones that are not as gold standard are your cervical position. You can do, like I said, an ovulation test strip. You might feel what's called mid-cycle, it's like a tingling pain, or it's called Mittelschmerz, and it literally feels like your ovaries are kind of like dancing a little bit. You might have light bleeding or spotting, abdominal bloating, fluid retention, and breast tenderness. And so those are all signs too of ovulation. They're not going to be, they're not like, they can happen for other reasons though too. So that's why the qualitative basal temperature is really the most accurate sign that somebody has ovulated. And also if they have, I mean, if they've got a regular cycle, if this is something that doesn't need to be like a perfect 28-day cycle, and that's a misnomer. Cycle lengths can be anywhere from 18 days to about 50 or so, depending on what the research you're looking at. Even if you have that, let's say you have an ovulation every 3 months like clockwork, and you've been like that for 5 years of your life, that is for that individual a normal cycle. If they have nothing else going on, such as no other, either whether it's reproductive disorders, whether it is gut issues, whether it is mood disorders or anything else, if you are clean, like you can say, I feel healthy, I feel good, I just have my period and I ovulate every 3 months, that is your period. That does not need to be medicalized. You don't need to take drugs for that. It is just a complete fallacy that women have to have like these very 28 perfect day cycles, which really was only invented because of birth control. So like I said, that rise in waking temperature is the best way you can tell that you ovulate.
Well, I actually have a personal question. I don't know if this will make sense or not, but if you are on a regular cycle, and you said, and some of the side effects could be like tenderness, like boob tenderness, or anything like that. There are months where I'm in excruciating pain, where I can't sometimes tolerate it because, I mean, obviously they grow almost like a cup size bigger, and they're super tender. And I obviously have like cysts from training, but like they're clear because I've obviously checked that. But I just don't know why it's every couple of months where it's like unbearable, where I wake up in the middle of my sleep and I'm just like, what is going on? I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah. So couple different reasons. One could be depending on what your cycles have been the preceding months, and also your training. If it I would suggest like tracking stuff like this, because if it followed, say, a period of time that you didn't ovulate, it would be indicative that your estrogen is rising way too fast and you're not making enough progesterone to help counterbalance. Really tender breasts are typically a sign about estrogen. And how they are acting, because there's 2 different types of estrogen receptors we have in our breasts, and that does really kind of help to navigate what's actually going on there. The soreness too, like you can track that, so you can start to see, like with the thing I'll send you guys, but you can start to see like what the degree is. Like, so for you, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, like that's a 10. There's no question, that's a 10. And if that's something that is you have not found is related to training, or say whether or not you've ovulated, then I would start to think about dietary. If there's a period of time that, say, you were having more soy or phytoestrogens, if there was a period of time that you were maybe under more just general stress, because our cortisol does affect how our body, what it does with estrogen, and caffeine. I mean, stimulants, yes, and to some extent. But if this is like a rate, like if you're seeing this is literally every 3 months, the other thing it could be is that women, this is where I can get into pseudoscience and where my researcher hat has to come off, because we don't know enough about this. So this is based purely off of a lot of, I don't know if you can see, I collect old books. They're like behind me on my shelf. So when you go back into pre-clinical trials, there was a lot more theories on the cycles of women, and that not only do we have like monthly cycles, but we also have, say, seasonal cycles. And that there were some kind of theories that women had more of a difficult period 4 times a year at the start of each season, as your body is adapting to the changes in like the environment, the weather. Vitamin D also plays into this too, but they didn't know that back then. So that's one theory. There's also the moon theory, and that is around certain full moons, women do have more marked periods. There is not a whole hell of a lot of research on this. However, from personal experience, I can tell you that I'm one of those women. I've been tracking this since this is 7 years. Yeah. And around full moons, I'm like freaking werewolf. My periods are worse. I have worse PMD, and it's only around super moons. But when you look at your own personal data, that's when you can see it. Right. So I would definitely suggest that. And then there's some other things to look into too, even just around where the sensitivity is. If it's all over, if it's nipple based, if you are having any more like any additional, say, nipple discharge, well, then that's a sign of prolactin levels. And that could mean that there's something else going on.
Okay. All right. Julie, do you have questions, or you want me to move forward?
No, go ahead. If you got one, go for it.
We only heard your first question too, Julia.
Oh yeah, that's true.
The other one just had to do with, outside steroids ultimately affecting a woman's ability to have kids.
Yeah. Okay. If you don't ovulate for a very long time, it's going to be even harder for people to have kids. It's the same with birth control, right? If you're not creating progesterone, and if you're not creating that normal cascade of hormones that your body needs to be fertile, it is going to be harder for somebody to. This doesn't mean all women. I mean, I've worked with women that were on the pill for 10 years, they go off, and 2 months later, they conceive their first child. But there's so many other factors here. I mean, genes play such a huge role in this. Other types of comorbidities play such a huge role in this. Training plays such a huge role in this. We fail to recognize in the traditional medical model how much our stress affects our bodies and affects our hormones. And that stress truly is, no matter if it's from training or internal stress, or like I said, the external, like breaking up with your boyfriend, that has a huge effect on your body. And that your body will produce more adrenal androgens. And as a result, that can affect how your body then is going to be creating ovarian androgens. It might, in some cases, will produce less, which will then throw off your estrogen progesterone, because your body will sense it has enough. I don't need to make them this month, or make as much this month. Or it can be the opposite, and that it's like, hey, you're creating more androgens, I'm going to create more androgens. Let's get this party started. And that's when you start to get hyperandrogenism symptoms. So with an exogenous steroid, I mean, looking at things like how long somebody's been on it, what they've been on, have they been actually managing and taking care of their health throughout it? Are they taking care of the other systems that are affected by steroids? I did a podcast Q&A last weekend with my boyfriend. We were joking because it's like, as bodybuilders and strength athletes, it's like, me muscle, me want muscle, me take androgen. And it's just like this very like, androgens equal muscle and androgens equal strength and nothing else. And that as a result, we fail to recognize that androgens actually play a huge role in our body. And if we are overproducing or underproducing, that's going to have a massive effect on the ways in which our body actually functions. I mean, for liver, it's really common for people to perceive that when they take an oral steroid, that their liver is going to get, their enzymes are going to get messed up. But it's so much more than that. Like, even just looking at the liver, your liver is where you metabolize your hormones. If it's not working properly, you're not going to be metabolizing your hormones. If it's not working properly, you're not going to be having a healthy digestive system. Your microbiome is hugely influenced by estrogen. So you are throwing off your entire system. And that's just like two small examples. A lot of, steroids, full stop, whether this is birth control or anabolics, you're going to be leaching certain essential vitamins and minerals that your body needs to function, because it's just what we call a drug interaction. That's what happens. That's what you get when you roll the dice. Now, a lot of the same nutrients that you're leaching are those that are actually needed to be able to metabolize your hormones properly. So you start to get in this very messy place where you're creating an environment that has more hormones than your body needs, but it doesn't have that recycling plant to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. And that's where side effects happen. That's where bad shit happens. And so looking at, instead of just how this is affecting your strength or how this is affecting your muscle or your body composition, we really do need to look more internal and see and balance. There's preemptive measures that women can do before they go on something, after they go off something, while they're on something. And this is the same for birth control or other types of drugs. I mean, this is the same even for antibiotics. If you have the ability to know when you're going to go on something, or if you're on something, to be able to do throughout and following. It's common in that black market steroid world to talk about things like post-cycle therapy or PCT. What do you do after? Well, for men, there's this very bro science idea of exactly what you need to take, regardless of if you've had side effects, regardless of if you've taken other things throughout your life course, regardless of if you are even, experiencing high levels of estrogen or where you are in your life course. For women, we don't even have that conversation. Right. It doesn't exist. And there are poor women out there that are getting given by their coaches post-cycle therapies that are fucking them up just completely, because you're now putting fire on an inferno. Your fire is already there. And then you knock stuff out with like anti-estrogens. Well, that's gasoline. You've fought fire with fire, and then you put gasoline on it. Your ability to, say, conceive is going to be reduced, in particular if you've got enzymatic issues, genetic issues going on as well, or other sites of stress in your body or external stress.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Complicated.
It is complicated, but and the craziest thing though is how we can navigate this on a very superficial level is not actually that complicated. Our bodies are so complicated that we don't actually have to do crazy ass things for a baseline, for that foundation. Yeah. Some of the most important things that can make a massive impact on your hormones are things like sleep. Like a good night's sleep, you're stabilizing your HPA, so your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. This is one of your master and command centers of your body. You're changing the ways in which your body is working with cortisol. You're improving your insulin sensitivity. You're regulating your luteinizing hormone. You're regulating your estrogen, your progesterone, and your androgens. So if you have sleep disturbances, that is something that is pretty minor that you can adjust some lifestyle factors to help you improve upon. Moods and decreasing your, decreasing how you get affected by certain external stressors to you. Estrogen lifts you up by boosting serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine. Progesterone helps to calm you. So if you're not making progesterone, you're going to be more prone for anxiety. If you're knocking out your estrogen, you've just taken away your mood booster. So progesterone and estrogen, they're like a yin and yang. Things like reducing inflammation throughout your body, through what you eat. Food is so important here. Having fun, developing good coping strategies, managing any other medications that you might be on, working on your gut health, making sure that you're pooping every single day. So important.
So for somebody coming off of birth control, they can start with simple things like quality sleep, quality nutrition. And I've heard even women who come off birth control and are having trouble conceiving then stress about not conceiving.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those three things right there can be major factors in just starting the process to getting their bodies back to normal.
Absolutely. And that's something that I recommend people do before they go off. Get those things in check. If you think about it like the game Jenga, so you've got a ton of blocks, and when you're on birth control, you've already messed stuff up. It's like you're deep into that game of Jenga. You don't want to just pull something now out of the mix and just stop taking it without restabilizing your tower. You need to restabilize that foundation in particular of the foundation things that make us good humans and healthy humans. Gut health, liver health, manage any yeast that you might have. Work on your nutrition, get those things in line. So then when you do go off, you have a base, you have an anchor to help your body know what to do with either the excess surge of hormones or potentially deficiency. Don't freak out if you don't get your period for the first month, the second month, or sometimes even the third month. Track, because then you have data to be able to know what to do next. I work with a lot of women to help them come off birth control. And it's always amazing to me in that about month 3, they'll start to get really concerned. They'll be like, what's going on? Like, am I never going to get my period? I'm like, well, you were on it for 7 years during your developmental years. So you went on at 17. Women are still hormonally developing at 17 years old. So your body, it kind of like you were building something and then you just stopped. So it's important just to remember that time is vital, but to not be ignorant with your time at the same, in the same vein. And that's to know like, okay, I'm maybe 4 months in and I'm still not ovulating, but I did just do a meet. Right? So if you did just do a meet, then that's going to affect because of training and the stress of training. And to be able to work with a healthcare practitioner that then can help manage and walk somebody through this. Sometimes it's the use of a natural progesterone. So the progesterone that is in birth control is not actually progesterone. It's like a wolf in a sheep's clothing. It doesn't do the same thing. It doesn't even look the same. It's called a progesterone. So it's spelt totally different. So progesterone, there are natural forms of it that can help if somebody's progesterone deficient to kickstart their body. Now, those, just like anything else, come with side effects. One being sleep you're just a zombie on those. And so to be mindful of that and going, okay, I'm not ovulating, but I'm also not maybe putting in the work in terms of keeping my stress down because I really want to do that meet. I know progesterone is really important though. I know I need to be producing it. Where is my line? Where is that line I'm going to cross? And I suggest women set this before they actually go off the pill. Get yourself a game plan. It's almost like a battle plan, because when shit hits the fan and you're stressed and you're tired and you're anxious because you haven't had your period, you don't want to be
worse.
Exactly. And all too often I hear of women that do that and they go into their doctor's office and their doctor then just goes like, oh, well, we'll just put you back on the pill. And that's not a solution. You are not getting a period, a menstrual cycle when you're on the pill. The pill's whole purpose is to stop you from ovulating. You are chemically castrated. It is shut down. So keeping that in mind. And then, like I said, nutritional things too. I mean, super simple things can make massive impact on somebody's, just the way that their body's functioning. We don't treat food with enough respect. It gets completely by medicine, like, throwing out and being, oh, that's not important. It is important. Eating good whole foods, nutrient dense, looking for like phytonutrient diversity, which bodybuilders and athletes are awful at because they just eat the same thing. Limiting toxins and sugars, reducing triggers. So if something is upsetting you, pull it out for a bit, give your body a break. Making sure you're digesting your food, making sure you're not having things like, 'acid reflux or bloating or constipation. and figuring out why you were getting those in the first place, getting enough protein, getting balanced fats, realizing, and this is in the keto age that we're in right now, ketogenic diets can be really great for some people. But the thing is that research has shown that women do need some carbs to be able to have a healthy menstrual cycle. Not all women. There are some that can get away with the keto. However, your gallbladder can get really messed up through the use of steroids and through the use of, just having messed up hormones like hyperandrogenism or PCOS. So if you then try to jump on a high-fat diet, your gallbladder is going to freak the fuck out and not know what to do with that fat. And it's just going to get ugly very fast.
Right.
Same thing if somebody tries to, go super high carbs. Or I've had a lot of women recently go like, well, I went to this new coach who said my macros were too low, and they added in a whole bunch of carbs. And oh my God, all of a sudden things just like, it got bad fast. And I can empathize with them because that happened to me in my early 20s before I got hooked up with John and Eric. And go slow. Your body, like I said, the Jenga, you got your Jenga tower, go slow. Whether this is post-comp or post-meet, whether this is you've just been, chronically dieting for many, many years, go slow with any type of intervention that you do. That includes supplements. If you've never, say, taken vitamin D before, vitamin D is awesome for your body, awesome for inflammation, awesome for your hormones, awesome for your progesterone. But if you've never taken vitamin D before, don't go up to like 5,000 IUs in one day. Right. Go slow. You don't know how your body's going to respond to it. And everybody's body is going to be different. And sometimes when we think we're doing good, we actually end up doing a heck of a lot more bad because we just want to fix ourselves quickly. We just want that quick fix. And food, whether it's food or supplements, they do have damaging effects. And we need to, like I said, we need to respect them. Like we should actually also respect drugs. We don't either. But same idea.
Yeah, that goes really with everything.
Mm. It's like, doing a like a 1 rep test and you've never squatted properly before. You don't do that shit.
I think I'm sure Julia is like, most of the people that come up to us, they're like, well, I'm not making any gains. And they're like 3 months in like a training. And I'm like, well, give yourself a year. And they're like, a year? Like they react that way. I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah, it may take some time. So, it's anything. And recently I took some testing and I'm under eating a lot. And I was exposed to one of my friends and he's like, don't just eat a bunch. Cause like I was freaking out. I went home and I'm eating like chocolate and I'm just like, oh my God, I had no idea I was under eating. And he's like, no, don't do that. He's like, increase 100 calories and increase like 200, like just ease into it. Like you like calm down. I'm gonna solve it in one day.
I'm gonna quickly grab there it is, my notebook. So one of the best things I can give an example for people, I'm gonna actually draw a picture. It's to remember, and this is for hormones, this is for food, this is for training, this is for anything. Yeah. But okay, this is a lovely bell curve. Okay, so like my bell curve. So optimal is found here.
Right.
Optimal is not found here or here. So optimal is found in the middle. Whether this is estrogen, whether this is, carbs, it is not found on either end of the bell curve. It is found in the middle, and the middle is wide. It's not one or the other. It's not, I'm on something, I'm off something. I've got low, I've got high. It is a continuum. Right. And that for people to remember and to recognize, thyroid hormones, digestion, whatever it is health is not found at the extremes. Health is found in that middle chunk. And so even for you, like going and starting to eat a ton of food, it's like you might have been on this extreme of under eating, but then you need to just get yourself back into this zone just by a little bit. So you can start to get more to that middle level
and more stable, ease into it and then able to stabilize it eventually.
Absolutely. And that's the same. That's the same with hormones. It's the same with inflammation. People try to kill all the inflammation in their body. And I'm like, what are you doing? You need some of that. Not all, inflammation is bad, or not all cortisol is bad. Not all estrogen is bad, but we love in our society, and especially in strength worlds, and bodybuilding is we love those extremes.
Yeah.
We love being, you know, in meat prep or not in meat prep.
Like there's a difference. Like there should be a huge difference, and there really shouldn't be, right?
No. And I think too, like, I mean, athletes alike, whether it's a strength athlete or a bodybuilder or just somebody looking to say get stronger or change their body composition. Mm-hmm. When the inside of you is not functioning the way it should, the outside is not going to function the way you want it to. So you are not going to be able to drop body fat the way that you want to. You're not going to be able to train as hard as you want to for your, say, meat prep. Internal function is how we can create the external that we want.
Right.
So when we have internal function, it creates and promotes the form. So that form being whether that's the way we look or the way we perform. And that we can fake this with things like drugs, but we can only fake it so long until it comes back to bite us in the ass. You can try to override it. And it's funny because I'll work with a lot of individuals. I'll be like, well, you know, this is what I did. And, you know, I didn't do this back then. And I'm like, but the thing is, you're now coming to me. So that means you probably should have done these things. You got yourself into a mess, whether it's you've killed your libido, you started losing hair, you've got cystic acne. For women, they have fertility issues or whatever it might be. We can only trick it for so long until it starts to really show it's the signs. And often those signs are happening right from the get-go. We just aren't paying attention to them.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. I think we touched on a lot of subjects, but one maybe that we can talk about is one inquiry said there's not much information or impact about the relation on menopause and lifting. This is obviously master's lifter. So, you know, can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah. So I love talking about menopause because it's so under researched. So first and foremost, there's menopause happens 1 year after your last menstrual cycle. All the stuff that people think is menopause, like the hot flashes and the night sweats and the mood swings, that's called perimenopause. So that's the time after somebody has a regular menstrual cycle and they're regularly ovulating, and then all of a sudden things aren't as normal anymore, and you can check this through tracking. But that period of time, and sometimes that can last 10 years, but it should not be hell. There is no way it should be hell. Usually the more messed up you've kind of like, you know, the more you've fucked around with your hormones earlier in life, the more that you're lining yourself up for that really tumultuous perimenopausal time. And that perimenopausal time can also be affected negatively through things like, comorbidities. So if somebody's got high levels of like type 2 or metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance, or they're overtraining or they're under eating, all these other things can just make that worse, because it is very akin to what we consider to be like premenstrual disorder or dysfunctional periods. It's just there's a different thing happening. Women are born with a almost like a reproductive stopwatch. It's a clock, and it's ticking, and that clock that's ticking is related to how many eggs that we have. And our body's role as women is to get rid of those eggs throughout the course of our life cycle. And so as we go through our life course, as we start to have less and less eggs, that's when our body goes, okay, we're doing something different now. We're not doing the same thing that we needed to do. And so menopause, there's, like I said, there's just so many myths around it. It is so under-researched. It is so, there's just so many myths. It's just crazy. But you're still making sex hormones. So even after you've gone through menopause, you've had your last kind of hurrah of your period, and you're done, you are still making hormones. There's a really big misunderstanding that women just stop making hormones. Well, then we would not cease to exist, because we do need our bodies to make something. They're just simply not being produced anymore by the ovaries. And so other parts of your body will pick up the slack and start to try to produce more hormones. Your adrenals are one of the ones that will actually start to produce more, as well as your nerve cells, believe it or not. Androgens are getting produced by our adrenal glands. And you're more likely to actually have aromatization, so that where testosterone aromatizes into estrogen, is more likely to happen, that process, after menopause, because you're making more adrenal androgens rather than ovarian, because the ovaries, they're gone. I mean, this is the same thing that's going to happen if somebody's had a hysterectomy, a tubal ligation, if they've castrated themselves, if they've cut down their axes before their reproductive stopwatch is ready to go, ready to go off, then your body will pick up the slack through other mechanisms. Estrogen is more likely to cause insulin resistance during this time. So as an athlete, you are going to be more likely or more prone to A, putting on muscle, which is great, but B, also putting on fat, which is not so great. And so role of diet, really, really big. Also, potentially training has to change because you're now creating more of those adrenal androgens. And so we don't want to completely tax out our adrenals because of the training stress too. Our adrenals are one of our biggest responders to stress. And so often I see that women might be able to train harder, but they have less overall volume, and they also are taking more time off, or they will keep doing like the same thing, but they might have to use either like a natural HRT protocol to help them buffer what they're going to be depleting by that level of training. DHEA is one of our big adrenal androgens, and that does get really affected by training in that post menopausal period. Other things related to training on menopause, like, I mean, she's absolutely correct. There is not a whole hell of a lot of research on this. And it's alarming to think that, like, in 2019, people are still calling menopause, like doctors are still calling menopause the wrong thing. And that they recognize that we just don't know enough about it. One of the other things too with menopause, though, I can bring in is the sleep. Sleep is going to be affected because of where you're making progesterone. And it's why a lot of women will have sleep disturbances in that kind of that end of the perimenopausal, just around the time that their bodies will stop having a period altogether. And that sleep, if you can get on top of that, it will have a huge, huge positive effect of not only your body composition and your training and everything else, but also how your body is going to be able to create hormones after you've gone through menopause. Gosh, I mean, other things is there's.
Well, I think among, it's very common as women get older, we kind of start to worry about our body composition. There's sort of that myth.
Yeah.
That we're just bound to put on body fat because the hormones are changing and blah, blah, blah. So, our menopausal woman may be tracking her hormones. Is that really the best way to go about fighting?
Are you catching any of that?
I think she said something about tracking hormones in the menopausal period and how to be able to manage menopause through that. I think. That's possibly. But yes, there's actually a menstrual tracker for women in menopause. I recommend, or perimenopause. I recommend that women actually continue to track their hormones even during that period of time. And even if somebody's had a hysterectomy or a tubal ligation, oopectomy, to also still track, because essentially when we think about our reproductive kind of control, we have our hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axes, and then we have our hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis. And so say somebody has an oopectomy, they're castrating that one, but this one is still doing things, and it will still send signals to this other axis thinking that it's still there. If you're, say, I don't know, like 40 years old and you're not in that perimenopausal period, your body still like thinks that it has things to do. It's often why people who have some type of, like, say, early hysterectomy or something like that, they'll talk about the double menopause. And that they're like, oh, I went through it after I had, that my hysterectomy, but as soon as I turned 50, it started again. And I'm like, well, yeah, because now your body's ready to start to go through this very normal thing, that's phenomenon that happens. I mean, our whole world works on a rhythm, whether it's the days, like, you know, daylight to sun, or to daylight to dark. There is a rhythm. There we go. Tides work on a rhythm. Moons, full moons work on a rhythm.
Yeah.
Our bodies work on a rhythm. Our cell turnover does. Our menstrual cycle, things work on rhythms. Our reproductive life cycle works on a rhythm too. And so it's a totally normal thing. People can get into problems if they start utilizing too much, though, either hormone replacement therapy or exogenous performance drugs during that kind of transitional period, because there's a lot happening as your body is literally changing into this next phase of its life course. And so there might be more susceptibility to things like side effects during that period of time, because your body, it's like you're going through puberty again. And it really is. There's enough research that has actually shown this. They've compared the things that women complain about when they're going through puberty with the things that perimenopausal time, and they've done the labs and everything else, and it's chaos. Yeah. And so if you then try to throw more into the mix that your body just can't handle, you are going to open yourself up more to side effects. So, I mean, thinking about just like estrogen deficiency, well, you're now not going to be creating the same amount of estrogen. And E2 in particular. And so you are going to open yourself up more for obesity, for adipose inflammation, for just an altered kind of fat, how your fat cells secrete different, how they're able to secrete and be able to actually shrink in size, for lack of better words. But you're opening yourself up to type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, fatty liver issues, impaired glucohomeostasis, heart issues, plaque, because estrogen does play a big role in all of these things. And so if you're somebody that is taking a ton of, say, anti-estrogens, because you're also taking a bunch of androgens, and you're thinking your estrogen is too high because that's what we're taught to think, you got to ask yourself, like, am I actually still creating estrogen at this point? Because if I'm not creating estrogen, I probably don't need to take those AIs. I mean, I can't say for certain everybody's body is going to be different, but that is this really big myth in both like the HRT community and the hormone and the exogenous hormone use in sports, is that a postmenopausal woman still needs to take a ton of AIs. And it's like, no, your body needs that estrogen that you're actually creating still. You don't want to completely get rid of it. Even if you're taking a lot of androgens, I would also suggest thinking about that a little bit more carefully, because you don't have the same affinity to be able to manage and process them. A little bit goes a long way, no matter where you are in your life course. And this includes when women are utilizing fertility drugs. It's the same for different types of birth control. A little goes a long, long way. And that ultimately we need to be able to help our bodies get homeostasis, not completely decimate them.
Yeah. I think we covered a lot of bases here.
We did.
An hour and a half in.
Oh, there's Julie again.
Hi, welcome back.
Hey, I know, I'm like running through like weird spots, so that's why I said go ahead. I know we probably got to wrap up soon.
Yeah.
Can you quickly give us the short answer on are SARMs worth, this was a question, are SARMs worth taking over steroids? Did it even do anything or what?
Okay, so I gotta like get myself ready for the SARM question.
Probably a long answer, but
okay. So if anybody has seen my other videos on this or read my articles, they will know that I am not a huge fan at this point in time of pharmaceutical SARMs. Pharmaceutical SARMs are very different than what you're getting in the black market. Essentially, SARMs are a newer classification of drugs. So they're called selective androgen receptor modulators. They are only recent advent. It's around, well, not even 20 years yet, that they've been created. And the reason why they were created was to make a complete utopian drug that is simply impossible to create. Pharmaceutical companies, because you can't actually patent anabolic worked anymore. They needed to try to find a way that they could, one, patent a drug, two, come up with a drug that could be only taken once a day, which if we think about the way our hormones work in our body, doesn't make a lot of sense because our hormones are constantly changing throughout the day. Two, they wanted to have it oral, not injectable. Well, oral drugs are incredibly hard on our liver, incredibly hepatotoxic. And in particular, hormonal drugs are even more hepatotoxic on our liver because of what our liver does for our hormones and also what gets leached when we take these drugs. So they wanted to make this magical drug. And they did a lot of failed attempts at first, like a lot. And they actually are still failed attempts. We do not have any type of SARM available for the mainstream market at this point in time because it cannot get approved anywhere around the world. So I ask, and I switch that back, do you want to take something that is essentially something that the pharmaceutical companies have thrown in a garbage can and some black market pirate has come, taken, and decided to turn into a performance enhancing drug? This does not go to say that you will not get any, say, gains from it, but the side effects you're putting yourself into are far greater than it's worth. There's actually been research that looks at comparing and testosterone and the gains you get from that with the gains you get from a SARM. And for what gains you get, your side effects are way more, not to mention you get a lot more benefit or pros that are associated with testosterone. So it goes to say, like, why would you do that to yourself? Women are being absolutely tricked into thinking there's also no side effects. There are side effects. SARMs are a steroid at the end of the day. All that's been done is they've taken the molecule. So all steroids have the same cholesterol molecule, whether it's estrogen or cortisol. It's a little house. They've taken that house and they've bastardized it into something that's almost unrecognizable for your body in order to be able to, one, elicit the effect the pharmaceutical companies wanted, and two, the black market people are doing this so it's not considered to be, or was not, an illegal drug. I don't know if you guys were familiar with like the whole synthetic highs, the synthetic legal highs that came out, bath salts, things like that a couple of years ago, and how many people were getting absolutely devastating side effects. Kids were dying because they were taking synthetic weed, thinking that it would do the same thing as weed. No, it is something that has been pharmaceutically, chemically manipulated, so it no longer is the substance that you want it to be. Therefore, why would you expect that it would have the same results or the same endpoint?
You'd be better off just smoking a little bit of weed then.
Exactly. And that's where it's scary to think how many women, and I get messages all the time about this, of going like, my boyfriend told me that if I took SARMs, it was going to be okay and I wasn't going to have any side effects, but I got acne and my clit grew and everything else. And so because there's not enough research on this, I've got to go to the actual like backbone chemistry root of it. And I can say that if we strip away all the layers, you're asking something to do the same thing or elicit some of the same things as an androgen. Therefore, it is still going to have an androgenic effect in your body. It's not going to be absolutely selective, especially in women, when I opened up this podcast saying we really don't know. Mm-hmm. And so if you're being told that this is a healthier option, please think twice. The effects on somebody's liver are devastating. Like, it is awful. Some of the things I've seen for liver values, it is absolutely terrifying. And not to mention, people don't just take one. It's a polypharmacy effect. Usually an individual will be taking an androgen with a stimulant, with an estrogen, either anti-estrogen or receptor modulator or something like that. And that I'll have people kind of question me and go like, well, SERM, so SERMS, so selective estrogen receptor modulator, why are those okay, but a SARM isn't? Well, SERMs are different because we're talking about a different hormone that's being manipulated. Clinical trials have been done with SERMs for decades now. It is still a relatively new drug. However, they're working on a different mechanism and through a different effect. SERMs still come with side effects. they still come loaded with side effects, and many of we don't actually understand and we don't know, because a lot of the trials are done on people that are going through something like cancer. They're not your athlete population, and athletes are usually the mutants anyways. Your body is not going to be able to respond to something the same as your general population because you're training.
Right.
When you train, you make hormones and you break hormones. So your body is going to respond to that drug totally different. If you are a female that has taken the SERM and you've been like, well, I got away, scotch-free, things are fine. The other thing to consider too is, were you actually taking a SERM? SERMs are really hard and really expensive to make. All too often, black markets are just utilizing an androgen, like an actual synthetic androgen, and marketing it as a SARM, or they're trying to make a SARM. SARM failed, so they'll put a little bit of an androgen in to still elicit the same, or what they perceive to be the same effect.
Wow.
Peptides are the same thing. So peptides are also a growing phenomenon. There's a reason why they're called research peptides, and that's because we are still heavily involved with researching them. And there's just not enough data, not enough information. And just to always remember, if you're buying something from the black market, you do not know what you are taking. You have no clue. There is a thing about how we make and create drugs, and I'm not completely on board with the process. I have a lot of qualms actually against it. However, it at least does somewhat of a job of protecting from heavy metals that are in the powders that people get from China and make in their, mother's bathroom sink. You're protecting yourself from bacteria and other type of pathogens. Dosing is at least, what you're getting. You know that what you're getting is that drug as well. Even if that drug causes side effects, even if that drug is not a great drug, you at least know that you're taking that. You don't know what you're taking when you're taking something black market. And we have one body. We have one body. That's it. And I'm finding more and more right now, people are not thinking about the long-term side effects.
Correct.
They forget that who they are today is not who they might want to be tomorrow or the next day. We have one body. That body is the same body. The body that you're stuffing full of SARMs or peptides or whatever it is the same body that one day you might want to welcome a child and to carry a child and to have that child grow up to be healthy and to see that child graduate from high school and get married. Think twice, do your research, do your homework, and know that you need to go to reputable people to do that. A bro, a drug dealer, whatever it might be, is not a reputable person. We are out there. Ken Kanakin has done an amazing job with Swiss, putting together people that are all in this field and creating an educational forum on this. He started in 2016. We just did it this fall in 2018. And there is literally the experts in this field talking about these things. They're talking about SARMs. They're talking about peptides. They're talking about how to actually test. Bill Llewellyn, he's got a test that you can check to see if what you're taking is what you're taking. It's called the Royd test. You can do that and see that. So these are things that are really important for people to consider, especially women. And I put the caveat on women because the delicate dance that our bodies have to do whenever we have a menstrual cycle is so intricate, and it can be thrown off so quickly.
Wow.
Yeah. I was just going to say that. I mean, you have a great point, because usually these conversations start with, well, my boyfriend, or, whatever it is, and they rely on them so much because they don't know better. So I think it's important for them to really say, well, why should I take this? What are the long-term effects, and who can I go to as far as like a reputable resource, like how you said? And that's why we're essentially doing this podcast.
Yeah.
So,
and that's also why, like, even for something like, say, birth control, I say to people, make your line before you go into the race.
Right.
Make that line in the sand and come up with your questions. Come up with the things that you're going to be keeping an eye out, and what are the things that you're not okay with. If you're somebody and you're like, I am not okay if suddenly my moods start to alienate my family members. Well, if that's something that then comes to fruition, and say you're on a stronger version of a combination oral contraceptive, and you're becoming like a very, very emotionally unstable. And you've put that line in the sand. And if it gets brought to your attention, hopefully you have the wherewithal to realize that that was your line and you need to do something about it. Even if you don't know what that might be at that point in time. Often we don't know until we get into these things, but it's almost like I call it management, but it's preemptive planning. It's a disaster plan. I mean, we all know we go underneath our desks when there's an earthquake, or in a tornado shelter when we hear the sirens. If we can treat hormonal use with that same degree of caution and precaution, it will go to help individuals navigate these things a little bit better. Athletes are, I can say one, as I am an athlete, we're fucking crazy. I mean, if you put that eye on either a total that you want to meet, if you put that on a physique you want to obtain, the abilities for athletes to be able to have this laser focus that's why athletes are, I mean, that's how you become a great athlete. However, that also means that you put your blinders on and you don't see anything out here. You don't see the fact that you haven't had a period in, let's say, 19 months or something like that. You don't see the fact that you have hair growth. You don't see the fact that your voice has changed. You don't see those things because you are like this. And often when we get told that from external people, we're, it's like, you can rationalize it. We all can. So being critical of it before you get in, thinking about it, reflecting on it, so important. You wouldn't follow blindly, like, let's say a training program, like a wave cycle for meet prep. If that wave cycle, all of a sudden, like, you're shitting the bed and you're not meeting any of the numbers that were predicted for you, you would probably have a conversation with your coach and be like, yo, this is not working for me. We need to change this up. The same thing has to take place with your body. And by doing things like the menstrual tracking, by taking notes, taking initiative, getting on top of these things, it will go a long way. And I can't say there's no absolutes in the world. I can't say that you're going to completely be fine if you say are using an illicit substance, but you may have the chance of potentially getting out of it with a little less, say, long-term damage than somebody who doesn't do that. All of our bodies are different. We all respond to things different. And there's a ton of other factors that I haven't even mentioned that work into this equation. But it is really about, like, risk analysis. And it's, how do I manage this risk a little bit better than if I were to do nothing?
Right.
Wow.
This is great stuff. Do you have any, Leah?
No, there's just so much information. And I know this is going to spark a lot of, hopefully a lot of just continuing conversation amongst the strength women in this community to be more mindful and to ask the questions and to really just kind of take to heart some of the things that that were said, and what, regardless of your decision to get on birth control or take a steroid, I think, like you said, it's really just about making an educated decision and
also having a safe place to actually talk about it, because there's this, like, this is hush hush, like, you shouldn't break that, or we should do this, but we should continue these conversations so people feel safe and feel like they can talk to others openly about it.
And the thing that I think is even scarier for a lot of women in the strength community is that because the information's not out there, often then it goes completely, like, uncharted or unnoticed. One of the big ones that I see a lot, and this is in both women in strength community, but also like bodybuilding, if they're taking androgens, especially like long-term androgens or harder, more androgenic compounds and substances, that they fail to recognize that they're inducing hyperandrogenism. Hyperandrogenism is the same thing of if you, say, have an adrenal tumor that's producing androgens, or you've got an ovarian cyst that's androgen producing, or maybe just genetically this is who you are, or there could be countless other factors, but you're inducing this high level of androgens. The effects are going to be systemic within your body. One of the biggest effects of you having high androgens is that you're not going to ovulate. Well, if you don't ovulate for a long time, and if there's other predispositions going on here, it can line you up for things like massive cysts. it can line you up for things like different types of reproductive actual structural issues that when you compound that with squatting or deadlifting heavy, you are putting yourself at risk for so much scary, scary things. Ovarian cysts can contude. They can turn around themselves. They can burst. You can get internal bleeding. It is something that it's so frightening when I consult with medical practitioners that they don't realize this because they've never been on the platform. They don't recognize that stuff. And so even when those individuals say go to a doctor, and usually people don't often actually put it out there that they're taking a drug, but they'll get an ultrasound, say for and for a pelvic ultrasound, and they'll be like, oh, well, you've got a really big cyst here, but it should resolve on its own. Potentially, yes, it can. However, it can also do some crazy ass shit when you put it under 500 pounds of pressure. And there's not enough research for this. This is all purely for me. It's anecdotal, comparing notes from a whole bunch of different fields together, which is what I do as a researcher, and trying to come up with at least some type of very educational understanding of what we're seeing and what doctors are coming to me and going like, I don't understand how this woman had this internal bleed happen when her cyst was not that big. And me going, well, no, she was on a bunch of drugs. You've also weakened your pelvic floor because you're a geared lifter and you're not doing any type of pelvic floor work. And now you've got a bunch of other factors mixed in there too. Like when you start putting all the pieces of a puzzle together, it is a scary world for a female lifter right now.
Yeah. Wow.
I call it chemical warfare because that's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Crazy. I think we're good. Yes, to wrap up, people can find you, Victoria, I know on social media. You do consultations, right? So if somebody is deep into some questions, they can reach out to you for a consult, right?
Yeah.
So tell us where they can find you, and then we'll go.
And I'll add those links because I know your website and whatnot and your social media handles, so I can add those too as well.
Perfect. It's pretty much all on my website too, because I try to keep a little bit organized when my brain is just chaotic with stuff. But so my socials are just Victoria Felkar, and that's Facebook and Instagram. And if people want to add actually my personal page too, that's cool. I don't really use my business Facebook, so yeah, that I'm working on that though. And then my website is just Victoria Felkar. And on there's I try to catalog all my videos I've done. I try to catalog all my podcasts because I've done a lot of on this topic. And as soon as I'm done my proposal for my PhD, I will be starting to post a little bit more videos again, as well as get back into some more consulting work. So, but if you want to inquire about any of that stuff or seminars or whatever it might be, the contact button on my website is the best way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. This was amazing, and I know this is going to help so many people, especially in a platform and a place to feel like they're welcome, to ask these questions and whatnot.
Yeah. And if there's ever an opportunity that you guys want me back on and get some more questions from people, know that I'm more than happy, because I see the need in my practice, like with what I do as consulting work. I see the need when I go and I speak at events and I have coaches coming up to me that just have no clue. Yeah. And I see the need from the research or the lack of research. Unfortunately, female athletes have been really experimented on since the get-go with performance enhancing drugs. It's just an untold story. And that's what my research is on. It's been going on for longer than I believe most people understand. And that is terrifying. And it makes a huge impact on our entire lives if we're not careful.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate the offer. I'm sure we'll take you up on that as we continue this seminar series. So thank you.
You are most welcome.
All right. Bye, guys.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.